And I just said to her, I can't do this anymore. And I just need you to be my mom. You have to do this for me, please, for me. And in that moment, she just looked at me and she said, if you're going to make me choose, it's not you.
Jessi Bailey, welcome to Tell Me a Story. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're talking about anxiety in this series. You are someone who's lived through a lot of trauma, really severe anxiety. Let's start here. Before you get into your actual story, tell me why you say yes to sharing your story. Why now?
I think, Clint's talking a lot about right now in church, this idea of exposure, and it's just part of my story. For all these years, I think I've thought of anxiety in general more as my handicap. But it's kind of the one thing that I've always had, and the Lord hasn't just taken it away. And so for me, I'm recognizing that it is part of who I am, and it's something that the Lord has done a tremendous work in me with, especially in these past few months. And so it's a way that I can share it and say, look what God has done. So that's why I'm here.
Tell me a story about the first time your world didn't feel safe.
So I've kind of wrestled with this, if it's a one moment situation or if it's something that was maybe cultivated over time. But if I'm going to go way back to the beginning, I was born in a very small town in Northwest Georgia as an only child to my mom and my dad. My dad worked in a factory his whole life up there. And my mom was a hairstylist. She had a hair salon in the back of my grandparents' convenience store right across the street from our house. So very small town. And, my mom was beautiful. She was prom queen, cheerleader, just a beautiful woman. And, my dad, again, just like a blue collar, strong, steady man. And when I was around the age of 7, we moved to Florida. My dad got offered a new job, and unbeknownst to me, they were having problems, I think. And so I believe that maybe the change in location they thought would help with their issues, but it didn't. And so when we moved to Florida, I quickly acclimated. I got into sports and cheerleading, and my mom quickly got a job at a new hair salon. Everything was, seemed great. And as the days went by, they built a new house together, and things just weren't good, I guess. So one day my mom picked me up at school, just like usual, and she said, we're moving. And I thought to myself, well, that's confusing. We just moved into a brand new house. So we just moved to Florida. Why are we moving? And she said, oh, no, not all of us, just me and you and I. We're going to move out and we're going to move into a new house. Everything's going to be great. And so I don't recall all the details, but pretty quickly she packed us up, and her and I moved into a small house just a few blocks from where her and my dad were living together. And during that time, it was just so kind of strange. It was like she moved everything out. My dad had our patio furniture in the living room. And, when I was with him, he's working long hours at the factory and then coming home and trying to be a single dad and deal with his own emotion and trying to figure out what is he going to do. And my mom very quickly, I think, embraced this new, more of a single lifestyle. My mom was an alcoholic. And so I think this gave her the space to just sort of go out and do her thing. And so one particular night I was with my dad, and he was pretty upset. He had been calling her back when we had house phones, and calling, and she wasn't answering. So he loaded me up in his truck, and we went over to this little rental house, and we just sat in the driveway. And I remember him being very sad and just sort of, where is she? Why is she not here? And I remember thinking to myself, it's so late. I'm in my pajamas. Why isn't she home sleeping? Like, why isn't she inside?
Did you and him talk at all in that car? Or were you?
I think we were both just sitting there, and I don't remember that detail. But so at some point that evening, she came home. She had been out with someone and came back, and she had been drinking. And so my dad is, kind of questioning, where have you been? Are you seeing someone else? People are telling me that you're with someone else. And she just kind of denied. And then they get into this conversation that turns into just my dad being incredibly vulnerable. I mean, he is this big, strong, tall, manly man. And I just remember seeing him desperate and, on his knees before her, just begging her to please come home. Please just come home. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Let's fix this. And I kind of remember in my kid brain, when I thought back on this story, why was he apologizing? He wasn't the one that left. It was just so confusing. I don't understand why are you sorry? But in that moment, it was kind of this picture of she had all the power and he was vulnerable, and him pouring his heart out to her. She just squashed it, rejected it, said, no, I want to be happy. And that was it. We left. We went back to my dad's house that night. I went to bed, and that was the end of that story. We never talked about it again. It was just I think that was probably a moment of, okay, we just need to be seen and not heard. This, here's this man who is showing his emotion to my mom, who I had thought up to this point for my first 7 years of life was my everything. And, we did everything together, and it just I felt so sad for him and so confused at why she wouldn't come home. Like, you have this person who just wants to be with you. And
did you feel embarrassed for him, or is it more just sadness and confusion?
I think it was both. I think I've always been really close to my dad, and I think I was embarrassed that he was willing to show so much vulnerability, and to be outright rejected and not met in that space felt unsafe. It felt uncomfortable. But from that moment forward, that was my relationship with my mom going forward. It was very, you just don't show emotion. Like, you adapt, and she's making the choices, she's making the decisions, and we're just going to move on. This is our life.
And so your life became very different with your dad than it did with your mom. Tell me more about your mom. She's embracing the single lifestyle. Would you say it was kind of a party scene lifestyle?
Yeah, for sure. I think my mom had always been a very social person. Again, very popular when she was growing up, and just always kind of surrounded by people. So I think now she's in this new place. She's trying to meet new people, and she has this whole new life ahead of her. So, I'm going back and forth between her house and my dad's house a couple times a week. And my dad's sad, and my dad's working his tail off. And then my mom is also working hard, but she's partying hard. So that whole year of us being in this small house was just kind of a revolving door. Very chaotic, very confusing for me as a kid. Like, who are all these people? And
at your mom's house?
At my mom's house. It was always a party. Just random people in and out. But she always included me in it. So it was kind of, at the same time, fun and exciting. As a kid, like, you want to be with the adults, and you want to be included, and you feel important. And this is really fun. But for, in a 7-year-old brain, it's fun. But looking back, it was definitely the start of, now that I've connected dots, this feeling of confusion and feeling like, how do I make myself safe?
So I want to take it full circle for a minute. In later episodes, we're going to talk about anxiety itself, how this moment came to impact the rest of your journey and where you are today. But I know you've done a lot of story work with Dan Allender and his resources. There was a moment when you were older where this whole narrative kind of came full circle. Tell me that story.
Okay. So as I grew older, as a teenager, my life was so intertwined with my mom. I still had a relationship with my dad, but my mom was my person. We did everything together.
Almost like friends, like peers.
Definitely. We were peers. I would have said she was my best friend. And all my friends loved her. She did all of our hair and took us to concerts, and we did very fun things, vacations, and all of that. Within the first year of her leaving my dad, I was a cheerleader, and she actually did start dating someone else, and she remarried to my stepdad. And even my stepdad, in retrospect, I think he did his best to kind of keep her on track and kind of hone in on us. Yes, rein her in. But she still found a way to kind of be a little wild. And so the older I got, going into my college years, now I'm approaching adulthood and going out and doing all these fun things. And I would have said we were probably great drinking buddies. I mean, that's kind of the way I grew up. Life's a party, and there's always alcohol involved, and you can't have fun any other way. So as I, kind of matured going through college, it was just something in me knew it was wrong. I knew it wasn't a healthy relationship. I'm 3 hours away in college, and I'm getting calls from my friends that I grew up with kind of telling me, hey, your mom's, on a bar stool falling down again. She's not good. And so it was kind of always this sense of, I have to take care of her. It's my place. It's my job. I know how she ticks. I can get this train back on the tracks. And so it was a lot of that back and forth in my early 20s. And again, I think I knew something in me just so desperately wanted her to be my mom and not my friend. And so shortly after I met my husband, I was a senior in college. We actually grew up in the same hometown. So I would go home to where we grew up to visit. And so with that came, we would be seeing my mom. And I remember when we first started dating, we would go out to bars, like me, him, and my mom. And it was fun. We had a great time. All of our friends loved hanging out together. And at some point, it was like I had met his family. He and I were getting serious. He was raised in a Christian home, so it was a completely different feel being around his family. Just, they were, I guess, what I considered normal, and the closer he and I got and the more we started to build our life together, I knew I needed to have a hard conversation with her, because I knew the closer we got to marriage, she was not good with that. It was very, I think she resented my kind of moving on with my own life. And so one particular night, she had been drinking, and she was actually at our townhouse we were living in, my husband and I. And I kind of pulled her aside into the guest bedroom, and I just said to her, I can't do this anymore. My stepdad left at that point. And I said, your husband's left. We've got 3 step siblings now that are all kind of scattered, and everything is falling apart at the seams around you. And I don't think you recognize it. And so I need you to get help, and I will help you. And I just need you to be my mom. You have to do this for me, please, for me. And in that moment, she just looked at me and she said, if you're going to make me choose, it's not you. And so I think it was a full circle moment. And, I never connected these dots until recently, going through counseling and doing the class here at the Commons with Dan Sheeran. It's been incredibly emotional and incredibly difficult, but it has been so healing, because I can look back on so much and just see some dots connected. And it's been eye-opening. It's like, oh, okay.
What were those dots you see?
I think that the dots were, vulnerability and emotion equals weakness. And ultimately, weakness equals rejection. And while those may not have been her motives necessarily, I'm very aware that we are all flawed. And I have prayed for years for her salvation and for us to, for this to at some point be reconciled. But it was just this struggle of, you need to be seen and not heard. You're my sidekick. And if you want anything more from me, the answer is no. And so fear of rejection, for sure, And I think that has driven a lot of my anxiety. You know, it's like I can see myself when my husband and I got married. It was like so pure and whole and good. And his family was so loving and so wonderful that I held on to that for dear life. And it was this sense of if I screw up or if I do something wrong or if I'm too emotional or if I'm too much for anyone, that's it. You're toast. And so I think, you know, those moments definitely shaped a lifelong journey.
Which you kind of identified yourself against what your mom did in the opposite. Because I feel like by the time I met you, you were this very together, self-controlled, you know what I mean? Like you don't ever go crazy, or it was like, I wonder if some of that was part of what you had learned. I'm not going to take this path. I'm going to just be a good girl.
Absolutely. I think, you know, it's so interesting because the way my siblings, my stepbrother and my stepsister and I grew up, you know, you get good grades, you follow the rules, you have a strict, you know, curfew. We grew up with all these rules to be good kids, you know, demanded respect. And all of those were great things. But it was like, on the other hand, that didn't make me be accepted. It was just, that was what was expected of me. And so that's what I did. And yeah, after being saved, I think it was such a stark before and after for me. It was like a life of chaos into this very solid, I know exactly where my life is going. Whereas before, I mean, I just assumed I would end up just like her. Like, I mean, what else is there to do? I guess I'll just figure it out as I go, kind of. But the moment I was saved, my whole life trajectory changed. So it's like, I'm living for Christ. Like, I know where I'm going and it's certain. And it just bred new life into me. You know, my in-laws are the ones that actually led me to Christ, which is such a beautiful part of my story that I can't thank them enough for, because it would have been very easy for them to judge my brokenness. They knew where I came from, and it was very different than what they probably would have wanted for their child. But they welcomed me with open arms. They prayed for me. They made me so curious that at some point I just remember thinking to myself, I want what they have. And in order to keep it, I have to control it. And I have got to hold on so tight so that nothing gets out of sorts, because that's when things get confusing, and that's when people leave, and that's when people say, I'm done. So yeah, definitely, I would say I'm a class A control freak.
And that served you well. Until it didn't.
Yeah.
Until at some point, it all kind of came crashing down. And that was almost like part 2 of your journey and what God did. So we will get into that in another episode, talk some about anxiety and how God has allowed you to kind of fall apart and put you back together, and what you've learned. Because honestly, Jessi, you are one of the most godly women that I know. I don't say that lightly. And that is what everyone says about you, I think, because you have done the hard work. So I want you to get to speak some to what that hard work actually is. But thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for sharing your story. Yeah, absolutely.